Welcome everyone to Sego's App Experiences webinar on mobile app performance monitoring on real devices, how it works plus live demo. My name is Margarita. I'm the Director of Marketing for App Experience. In today's webinar, we're talking about mobile apps and poor performance, and I'm excited we'll also be presenting a demo for you which puts theory into practice. In addition to this webinar, we have more great resources and information on our website, so please check that out. And please feel free to contact us at any time. We have mobile solutions experts available who are happy to answer your questions, give you a demo, talk about your needs, or even set you up with a free trial. Our speaker today is Patrick Quilter from Quillmont, who will introduce himself in just a minute. But before we start, I just want to let you know that at the end of the webinar, we'll have a dedicated Q&A as time permits. So if you look in your control panel, you should see a question section where you'll be able to submit your questions. So please feel free to submit your questions throughout the webinar. You don't have to wait until the end. I'll do my best to go through those questions and field them to Patrick at the end. And if you had a question and we weren't able to answer, shoot us an email to our team and we'd be happy to answer them for you. And without further ado, I'll pass it off to Patrick.
Hi everyone, good to be with you today, and thank you Margarita. And as Margarita mentioned, I'm Patrick Quilter. I'm the owner of Quillmont, and I'm happy to be presenting today with our partner Zygos. Zygos App Experience provides a great solution for mobile app performance monitoring on real devices. And today we'll talk about why this is vital to numerous industries and see how quickly we can set things up in App Experience to monitor our most critical transactions. So let's talk about consequences. What are the consequences for mobile apps that perform poorly? Well, a couple of statistics here from a Think with Google sponsored article. First, 29% of smartphone users will immediately switch to another site or app if it doesn't satisfy their needs, meaning they can't find information or it's too slow. This should get us thinking about app decisions from a design standpoint, or how can we eliminate steps such as button clicks and excess screen flows? Then, based on whatever's left over, how can we ensure those call to actions or the necessary button clicks, elements, and screen flows we actually want to use and want to have the users interact with? How can we test those to make sure they're performing at optimal levels and from a transaction standpoint? Our second statistic, and probably more critical, is that 40% of shoppers will wait no more than 3 seconds before abandoning a site. Walmart is a particular case study that experienced a 2% conversion rate increase for every 2 seconds of performance they improved. So it's pretty amazing how this can be done by simply removing custom fonts and bloated image files. But what happens when app developers don't take these consequences seriously? So in this study, we can see some common reactions to apps that were running slow. At the top of the list is that 48% of people uninstalled the poorly performing app, while 33% decided just to stop using the app, and 32% looked for an alternative app. So to make a long story short here, with fierce competition between competing apps and app store ratings that are publicly facing, there's not a lot of tolerance for mistakes. And here in another study, and this one was actually conducted by Zygos, analysis was done on perceived performance when buying auto insurance online. 1,000 real people were surveyed about app performance. And the graph plots the relationship to how people rate a site's performance and then how it actually measures. So the takeaway here is that those that are faster than the average are perceived faster, and those that are slower are perceived slower. And this might seem pretty obvious, but the real takeaway here is that people are picking up when your site is slow. And regardless of the digital media, there's a correlation between app performance, whether it's on the web or whether it's in a mobile application itself. So it's very cross-platform analysis here. So in this study, we're correlating performance to user behavior, and we see this a lot in retail. This could be a self-service task or something like purchasing a product. And what was found is that bad performance impacts the likelihood of conversion. But the opposite isn't true, meaning really good performance doesn't positively impact conversion. You can have the best performing app, but that doesn't mean it's going to compel someone to buy your product. But bad performing apps may discourage somebody from buying. The real takeaway here is you need at least above average performance just to remain in the game. And performance monitoring is critical in the retail space. Another place where it's extremely critical is for the telecom industry. And let's take a closer look at this somewhat of a phenomenon that's happening in the telecom industries between the telecom companies and what's considered to be over-the-top services or OTT services. So first of all, OTT services are an application that delivers content over the internet in the form of audio, video, messages, or other types of media. And Netflix and Skype are two good examples of this because they provide their services over the top of a network provider. Now, telecom operators such as AT&T and Verizon provide wireless internet access, and they charge their customers through a data plan. And because data plans are cheaper than other cellular services, customers have figured out that they can use the OTT apps to keep their bills low. So recently, telecom operators have formalized business relationships with OTT service providers in order to regain some of what could be lost revenue. And this is what's known as zero rating, where telecom operators offer customers content for certain apps and they don't charge against the data plan. And we can see a couple examples of these in the table above. Free basic Facebook and Wikipedia Zero are examples of subsidized zero rating, and apps like AT&T's DirecTV and Verizon's Go90 would both be used by customers without charges to their data plans. So this is where the monitoring becomes extremely important because especially in network environments where complex architecture changes are occurring all the time, putting together a reoccurring script and using it to monitor data usage of a targeted app can programmatically verify that no charges were applied to the app usage. So now let's talk about what real-life factors impact mobile performance. And what we're talking about here is device fragmentation. So cell phone versus tablets, iOS, Android, Windows phones, and others, the many different operating system versions that are out there for those platforms. And we're also talking about the difference between native and browser apps and how they use device memory and screen real estate. We're talking about network generations like 3G through LTE, the location services and the carriers that provide them. And finally, the unique aspects of running an application on a phone, things that you don't normally think of like battery life and or when a call occurs and other interrupts that happen on the device. And then, of course, Wi-Fi or cellular connections. So a strong performance monitoring solution should be able to accommodate all of these things. So at this time, let's actually take a look at some of the aspects, and we can look at that in our demo. So here, we're going to be taking a look at app experience and how it actually works under the hood. So when we get a performance monitoring project, we can see on the left side we have a number of different control panels, and some have to do with automated scripting. We're going to see the automated scripting capabilities. And we would start off by creating a new project. I've already created a project, so we're just going to use the one that I have currently. But the structure is to first start off in the scripting module, and then we're going to take those things that we scripted and hook them into and schedule them with our monitoring capability. So the very first step to putting this together is to start to define actions. So here I'm creating a new action, And what I mean by action is we can start thinking about the business critical transactions or steps, even going as far as to say we're putting together or formulating a test case. We want to break these up into discrete individual actions. And so the next thing that we would do is start to implement an action for a particular device. And here I'm looking in a sectioned off bank of devices, and I can find the one that I want. And I've decided to go with this Samsung, and I'm going to implement my action to be developed off of this particular device. Click the implement button, and that should get me started. So when I do that, we see that the device shows up on the right, so I can actually do my steps. And on the left is I'm going to have a drag and drop capability to do my action development. Here I can acquire the device, which means I'm the only one that can use this device now. So while I'm going through my steps, I have some assurance that nobody's going to take the device from me. And we can look at some information about the device on these tabs here. So when I do a right click on that device, and of particular importance is this NCD. That number there is what makes the device unique, and we're going to need to leverage that later on as we get a little bit further into the process. So that's how you get to that information. And another useful piece here to know about is being able to zoom. We can change, this just makes it a little bit easier sometimes to navigate when we're putting together our test case steps, but I typically like to have it at 20. So to get us started, we're going to use, we're going to demo off of the Southwest app. So I want to clean up my screen a little bit to get it back from the back to the beginning. And I'm going to start manually dragging over some widgets. And I'm going to be putting in some information. So what this widget does is it sends a device command, a keyboard device command, to the device itself. And I just specified that I wanted to click the home button for this Samsung. So where I'm set up at the moment, when I hit this step during my execution, it should reset my device and send me back to the home screen. That's just a good practice when putting together some scripting information. The other thing that I want to pull over here is a widget that closes applications. And when I pull that widget over and click this drop down, we can see all the applications that are installed on the device. And I want to find the Southwest application in this drop-down list. So now that I found it, I'm going to put it here and select it. Now the reason I'm trying to close an application is because when my script runs, I'm trying to make this repeatable so that I can run it over and over and over again. I want to ensure that the application is starting with a brand new session. So I want to make sure that I close it down every time as my first step. So let me drag that up here, even above my home screen click, and reverse the order. Then the next thing I'm going to do is pull over a widget that launches the application. And very similar, I'm going to click this drop down, and I'm going to find the Southwest application, and this will now launch my application. So once I get that into place, I'm going to click Save. And now I have the steps that I need to actually verify the transaction that I defined earlier. Well, I mean, one very common one is how long does it take the application to launch? And right now I'm adding a toggle transaction step, but I'll get back to what I'm going to do with that next in a minute. What I need to do after I have my launch step is to verify that the screen actually opens, that I'm on the expected home screen. That's the way I'm going to verify whether I'm launching something. And in order to verify that, I'm going to do something, kind of another one of best practice. I'm going to create a state for the first time. And what this is my expected value. When I get to the point where I want to verify if my application is launched or not, I want it to compare it to a screen that I've saved outside of my action. And the reason I'm doing this is because other actions might be able to leverage this state. And I only have to maintain it in one spot. So again, what I'm doing here is creating an actual value when I get to that comparison step. I'm saving it outside of my action because I want to use it in other actions. And the final point that I'm going to do here is I'm just going to verify that that welcome message is actually showing up. And that confirms that my application has been launched. So in my wait event back in my action, let me put it to a wait for state. And I can see now I have, in that dropdown, I have the state already in there, and it's in a good spot, and I'm following a best practice from a maintenance standpoint. So now I'm going to be able to do an actual comparison when I get to that wait event step. So the next thing that we want to be able to do is add some logic here. And it's going to be some branching logic. And it's going to say it's just going to compare or take different steps depending on whether my wait event worked or not. And here's where I'm going to finish off my toggle transaction steps. So we'll take a look at this in a second where this is all going. But I have a toggle transaction step at the top, as you can see, before the launch application. And then I'm doing a wait event, and then I have what essentially is going to be, it's going to take one of those two paths, but it's going to handle the transaction that I started in the beginning a little bit differently. So let me work on that piece now and move over to my scheduling section. So now we're outside of the scripting component, and what we're going to do here is create a new transaction. And we're going to hook this transaction into those toggle steps on the scripting side. And I like to keep a common naming convention. So I keep my transaction names and the actions that I create on the scripting side, I keep those pretty consistent from a naming standpoint. So it's easy to figure out which transactions go with which actions. And in this case, what I'm essentially putting together is I'm going to fail my transaction if the application takes longer than 3 seconds to open. Otherwise, it's going to be a passing step or just a nothing step, and just continue to cycle through and rerun my steps over and over again without reporting anything back. But basically, what I'm trying to figure out is I want to know that the launch application occurred in a reasonable amount of time, and I'm putting that at 3 seconds. We think back to our PowerPoint slide, that was actually the statistic that said that users would uninstall apps. So we can use some common sense here to come up with some measures. So on the toggle transaction step, you can see now I found launch application in my dropdown. So that was based off of what we did in the scheduling. And I started the transaction. On these, I'm stopping the transaction. So I have a start transaction, I launch the application, I wait, and then I stop the transaction. If all of that takes longer than 3 seconds to occur, then we have a problem. Now in this last branch here, what I'm doing is, instead of just saying stop, it's going to be a fail condition. I want it to report during execution that when it goes down this path, not only am I stopping the transaction, but it's a failed transaction. So again, we have three toggle steps, 3 toggle transactions. And depending on what happens during the execution, we're going to handle them a little bit differently. And again, with best practices, like I said, I'm going to put some naming convention in here and make sure it all looks good. Now to test this out before I actually hook it into the monitoring piece, I can actually run my steps right from the action here and verify that we're going down the paths correctly. So we get a good passing result here. This is just good debug practice to know that these things are available. But I can see all the individual steps that were taken. And on my wait event, that one that does the decision making, it actually shows me the images of the expected and actual. So it's capturing and doing comparisons between images during the execution run. So this is all very helpful information just to, during automation, to tell me what happened during a particular execution run. So now that I have one action, let me start over with a test case. Let's start filling that out now. So what we're going to do in the test case section is leverage the action that we just created. And we're going to give the test case a good name, something intuitive, and once again, makes sense with our naming conventions. And even with test cases, I get the similar drag and drop capability. And what I'm pulling over here is a widget that executes an action. And this should make sense because we just spent that time putting together an action. So when I hit select, I pick the action, it sees the action that was created in the action folder, and I save that. Now my test case doesn't necessarily just have one step, it's referencing the container that calls a couple different steps that are launching my application. And again, one thing I want to do when I pull over the execute action, it just defaults to that name. So if I want to keep my best practices going here, I should take the time to rename my execution step what it actually is calling. Okay, so now that that's done, I can come back over to my scripting piece and I can actually take my first step and setting it up with a monitor. So on the scripting side, we highlight the monitor folder, do a right click, give the monitor a name, and now we can start filling out some of the text boxes and drop downs that give our make our monitoring solution a little bit unique. So the thing about the monitor is that we can point those to test cases. So that's why we had to take that step to put together a test case. Then we select the device that we actually want to run this monitoring solution off of. Since I already have that device, and I can see that by the MCD, it was actually in the name. You can see it there as well, 30129. I can put that. That's how I can point it to a particular device to run on. And if I want to send in any alerts, I need to provide an email address. So I'll throw my email address in there. Now, the controls at the bottom tell me how often I want to run this particular monitoring solution. I'm going to tell it to run every minute, which might be excessive, but for purposes of this demonstration, I want to set it to a minute, and I set the start time to start now because I want it to execute immediately on check-in. Another thing that you should know about is that to make sure that we filled out all of these drop-downs correctly, we can hit the validate button, and that tells us that everything is correct. So we don't have to backtrack and figure out if we made any mistakes. And tell us right there by clicking the validate button. Now the next thing I want to do, since I put in my email address to send alerts, I actually have to create an alert. And I do that by right-clicking that folder and selecting a new alert. Here I can say what type of severity is it. Since it's load application, let's make it a major issue. And do we want it to send us just one email when the problem occurs, or several emails, where it occurs every time? So that can get a bit tedious to get alerts over and over and over again. If the problem is broken and it needs somebody to fix it, I only need to be alerted once. So that's what we set it to. And then the email subject picks up some environmental variables that tell us the particular error in the description, but we can also add in our own message on top of that. So this message will fire every time this alert gets triggered. Okay, so we had no problems there. So we have a few more steps to go, or at least one more step to go to pull this all together. So now that we have the alert, we need to specify some transaction policies or some conditions, if you will, that say under what circumstances do you want me to send the alert. So one of the things that we have to fill out about the alert is we'll first give it a description, and then we're going to say basically answer the question, when do you want me to send the alert? And I'm going to set it very severe. I'm going to say if there's one failure out of any executions, send it to me. And when I click the drop down, you can see the alert that we created is there. And then we have to specify the specific transaction. So the one that we created in the transaction folder that it's going to apply to. So now we've connected all the dots. Transaction policies, transactions, monitors, test cases, and alerts. Okay, so the next thing that we want to do is we can keep building off of this structure. We basically have the framework together. We know the steps that we want to do. And now let's say we want to add another set of actions and transactions to this overall solution. What I'm going to do here, instead of manually creating and dragging over the controls like I did for the Launch app, which was only a few steps, I'm actually going to use the recorder this time just to show that we can put together these actions, which are ultimately going to be monitored in our transaction steps, and we can put this all together real quickly. So I am looking at the search flight capability, and I'm going to select my from and my to values here, and I'm going to end up clicking the search button. And things like search are another fairly obvious transaction or business feature that we want to make sure is working in a reasonable amount of time. Search is used all the time, and those have a tendency to run slow when environments are off. So once again, we did our recording steps, and we have a lot more steps this time, and App Experience did the job for us of logging all those so we don't have to manually pull them over. And we're going to finish off by once again putting in our wait event. And in this case, at this point in the last time we created an action, we also created a state because it was going to be reused. And this time we're not going to create a state. We're just going to leave it in here. So we don't have to create the states, but it is a best practice to do it. So here I very quickly added in my transaction steps, and I'm going to do all the other things we did for the other transaction. First, create a transaction here, set the indicators. What does it take to actually either fail or pass a transaction? So they're in the right spot. Before we hit that search button, we turn our transaction on. We do the wait event. If it passes, we just stop it. If it fails, we stop it and fail it. And then notice in the timer drop-downs, those transactions that we're creating in the scheduling section, it's adding to that drop-down. So at this point, hopefully this helps paint the picture that the structure, once you get that initial structure into place, it's just repeating these steps over and over again until you're covering all your transactions. So again, before we hook everything together or move on to any next steps, we probably want to verify that what we recorded is actually working. So I've clicked the run button. The automation is taking over. We're going to manually inspect and see that everything is running correctly on that device for this action. And everything looks good here. And in a second, we should get an indication that those steps have passed. And we got it. And then, of course, now that everything's in place, we want to finish off by adding this new action now to our test case, our overall test case that's already hooked into our monitor. And now essentially becomes another step in the test case. And we're going to rename it so we know exactly which action it maps to. And once we check it in, that's complete. And I'm going to finish off the last steps here of creating the alerts and creating the transaction policy. Once again, I'll leave it at 1-to-1. And that completes the circle once again. So I want to add one more transaction in here because having 3 for visualization purposes is pretty good. And there's another good one that we can put in here that is on the Southwest app for searching for rental cars. Again, another area of search capability. So it would make sense that we verify that. So let's start off again by clicking the record button, and we're very quickly going to add those steps in. And we're going to go through and add our monitoring pieces in. Once again, populating the framework and flow that we've gone over twice now. We're just following those same steps. And now we have another transaction. And again, we finish off by adding that step to the test case and renaming it, of course. And you probably see me doing a lot of checking in and checking out. This is a good way to save everything along the way, just so you don't lose any steps in between. We are moving between scripting and scheduling, so it does make it a bit difficult to keep up with all the saving changes. So that's why I do check-ins and check-outs quite often. So here we're clicking on, and we've just published our monitor. Everything's in place, and now we've gone ahead and published. And now in the portal, we're in the dashboard view, and this provides the ability to view stats of most recently executed monitors, up-and-coming schedule runs, and live device screens as the monitor scripts are being executed. And we can see here that there's an error. So I have a problem that I need to fix. And one of the things that I neglected to do is that I forgot to release the device. I still have it acquired over here when I was doing my test case development. So what I should have done is do a right click and then release the device, and that's going to make it available for the live monitoring server. And to show you another place where you can confirm that the device is now freed up and that the live monitoring server has picked it up. Remember we talked about the MCD? Well, this is why I kind of put this number to memory, and I can see there's a little lock mechanism there, and this message is telling me it's acquired. It's acquired by that server, so that's great. So we're going to let that sit there and kick off, and let's take a look at the execution report. And this is where the list of all the single monitors that run on the system, this is where you're going to find those. And it's going to have information about device and carrier and run results. And we can click on any error links. And right here we can see one of the ones that was generated. And again, this is probably because I didn't release the device, but the monitoring system tried to tap into the device. And if we look at our dashboard now, we can see, hey, there's my initial failure under trends, and there's a check mark because one of my real runs actually passed. Now, under the transaction summary report, this displays the success rate and total number of transaction runs over specified date range for every transaction in your system. And the transaction details can be viewed when you click on them by their name. So look here, we see all the transactions that we ended up defining in the App Experience client. It got published and they're running live. Things are actually happening. So we can look at information in charts like the candlestick chart, which shows the maximum and minimum and average time for a transaction at different points in the day over a date range. And then that same information can also be viewed in a plotted format. So if you prefer the data like this, you can look at it with those two options. Okay, now these reports become much more meaningful over time with more execution runs. So let's take a look at one that I've been running for a while. And in the transaction details, we see success rates and its graphical representation. And then we also see incidents and escalations. And then in the next report, we see validations, and this shows up under the quality of service tab. And in this case, we can see that my launch application actually failed. Now, on the monitoring detail side, we can see the total number of runs and success rate. We can see here also a graphical representation of the success rate and failure and the transaction times. And the chart is somewhat interactive. We can pop certain squares out or pieces out to verify it a little bit more. Now, the monitoring detail reports, we can also look at availability. And this just gives a visual representation of transactions over time. And obviously, the longer you run it, the more information you can aggregate, and it probably reveals bigger trends. And let's finish here looking at some other failure reports. So if I saw something in my execution report and I saw a failure, obviously one of the things that I'm going to ask is which one of my steps failed? Where in the application did I actually have problems? And we can see here that we're taking screenshots. We can drill down right in the exact step that failed. This was our verification point, and it looks like that picture didn't properly load or didn't load in the right amount of time. So it ended up getting flagged as a failure, and the portal captures all relevant information so we can do our debugging from here. And let's take a look at what a successful run looks like, because we've had a number of those from what we're monitoring. And we can see all the monitoring steps that we put together, the transactions that we're covering, and see that in this case all of our steps are passing, and they had been several times, and we can see relevant information in the form of screenshots to make sure that is indeed happening. Now, if we ended up getting an alert, we'd receive an email the way that we were set up, and it would look something like this. So you have an alert, would have fired, and that's essentially what it looks like from the app experience point of view. So just some key points here of what we went over. Again, I emphasized in this demo here the importance of putting together a structure, a series of steps that you could do over and over again. And for every new transaction that you wanted to add, you just follow the same sequence of steps, and you're populating and building up your transaction suite that way. So those steps were, first of all, identifying key interactions to track. So we want to think about what are our critical transactions, what are the things that are most important to our business that if they weren't working well would turn customers away. So once we visualize that, we can start mapping those out into actions and with transaction steps. And then we created a test case, and that gave us the ability to do some end-to-end monitoring scenarios. We defined the transactions themselves. What was the allotted amount of time. We did policies, transaction policies, and we hooked those into alerts if we wanted to get notified. We scheduled and deployed our monitor. We saw how to do that, and then of course we looked at where we can find meaningful statistics in the dashboards. So at this time, that ends my major portion of the presentation, and I think we're up for some rounds of Q&A. So I'd like to turn it back over to Margarita. Margarita, do we have any questions?
Yeah, a few came in definitely through the while you're speaking. So I've listed them here. I kind of pulled them out of the console and I kind of push it on the side. So I'm gonna just start feeding them to you. First question I have here is: are alerts received for every little failure?
So you probably saw that I put in the tolerance level, and I put in a 1-for-1. So the way that the sentence would read there is: every time you detected an issue, If it failed 1 out of 1 time, I want you to send me an alert. So it's very reasonable to say, you know, on a particular test case execution or an action execution, there could be some noise on the device. Something just went wrong maybe on the network. So we might build in some tolerance to say, hey, if you fail 1 or 2 times, even if you do it in a row, don't alert me. But that is how you would control that. So if you didn't want to receive an alert every time something failed, you could scale up that tolerance number a little bit more and say, notify me on a more reasonable time.
Okay. We have another question here that says, any suggestions for a loading screen that can't be tweaked for better performance?
Okay, so, well, yeah, I suppose in some scenarios, yeah, it's either not optimal or not cost effective to spend time fixing transactions that, you know, maybe there's a good reason that you're not able to adjust or fix a particular problem. So in that case, what I would suggest is handling that from a development level. And what's a common practice is to actually make the application look like it's rendering faster than it is. And you can do that by including containers or dummy content as placeholders in your app. Include that as part of your app package. So when you reach that problem page, the first thing immediately that you show the user is this container that appears to be loading. So I'm not talking about a loading bar or some type of indicator that says, you know, that we're not painting the screen. You're actually trying to render certain elements of the screen and then populate that with the dynamic content once it finally shows up. And a really good example of this, if you look at your Facebook application, they have a gray placeholder that does just that. And they use it as a template for elements when loading content. And it makes the user familiar with the overall structure immediately, and it just doesn't present them, it doesn't show them or reveal to them that something isn't loading or taking a long time to load, because they're actually seeing something starting to paint. So that's the suggestion that I would have.
Okay, great. Here's a longer form question, so I'm going to try to read it as best I can. I want to check the data consumption of background running apps. For example, 3 or 4 apps should be running in the background ideally, and I have to see the data usage info for those ideal time. How can we execute this using App Experience?
Well, that is a very specific problem to solve. So a couple of things that come to mind. We didn't see this in the demo portion here. We saw pulling over steps that are widgets, so they're already built in. Behind the scenes here is a lot of Java that's going on to build those widgets and build those capabilities. So just in filling out the widgets, there's probably not one that's going to solve that particular problem. But the good news is, in lieu of those widgets, you can get to the Java programming language and build your own custom actions. And these devices have logs. The applications have logs. The devices have logs. So you could identify, if you can identify which logs you want to interrogate, you can use the Java programming language with the APIs, with different the App Experience APIs, and get any information that you might want, and do some type of custom aggregation for that information. But that would be my suggestion there. Is again, it's something we didn't cover in this demonstration portion, but it's nice being able to leverage the programming language, and that really gives you the flexibility to handle that type of custom solution.
Right, and we have more information on our API on our website, appexperience.cgos.com, if you want to find out more information about that. Here's another question. All of these devices are real devices. All of these are real devices. How to choose the different operating OS version?
So yes, they're all real devices, and so to get to a different device, that's just a matter of acquiring through the process that you saw me do on that individual device. So I had first gotten I wanted to make sure that I had access to a particular Samsung device, and that's why I had that MCD. That's a unique value that makes it easy for me to search for that particular device because I know I have applications there that I want to work with. If I wanted to use iOS, I would just look through that list that we were looking at in the beginning when we opened up our projects, and we would try to find an available device. And we would know it's available because it has like a little green indicator next to it. Otherwise, it has a lock next to it, means it's being used by somebody else. So that's how we get to the individual devices. And then let's continue that question a little bit further. Let's say we started off, we wanted to do the Southwest application on both iOS and Android, and I just started off and I did some transactions on Android, and now I want to be able to pull up Southwest on an iOS device and be able to run the same monitoring scripts over there. You may recall during the demonstration that I had actions, and I was clicking a button that said implement to implement the actions for that particular device. That once I get a solid script going, I can then just point that entire script to an iOS device, hit the implement button, and then I've got about 95% of what I need in order to run this monitoring solution over there. So that remaining 5% is just a matter of how I might have managed my my states, or the type of let's just talk about states. So what I mean there is, if I did something that was very image specific, meaning it took a picture and I'm expecting a particular image to show up, then I might have to update that on my iOS implementation. However, if I followed, to the best of my ability, if I followed working at the object level, so I'm just looking for particular objects on the screen and my application is consistent across both platforms, then I have a lot less work to do of that remaining 5% once I click the implement button. To summarize, that's the nice feature about developing. We start off and we develop our entire solution. We keep going through those rounds of steps that I had done over and over again to get it where we want to be on one particular device, and then we implement that for other devices that we want to run that solution on in the end. And we do have a little bit of tweaking to do, but it's very non-intrusive and minimal.
Okay, great. And we have time for a couple more questions. One is, how do you debug the monitors? Okay, so I did a little bit of that. There's a couple different levels of debugging that I did, so let me put it all together. So if we start off with actions, we pull over our steps, and once we get them where we want them, check them in, run them, and see that they pass. So that's one level of debugging. And then the other levels of debugging are when we're on the monitoring side, or where we're in schedule. So have scripting in schedule. We move over to schedule, and we start working with creating monitors, transactions, and transaction policies. There's always those validation buttons to make sure that we filled out everything correctly. So we like to hit those just because it saves us some time. We don't want to publish something and then find out we missed a step somewhere along the way. So we can hit those validation buttons, and as long as we see a green check there, we're good. Now, in the portal, when we publish our monitors and actually see the statistics rolling up, those monitors are in a development. It's called development mode, and that gives us like a practice area. And in most cases, that will suppress the warnings, so those aren't firing off every 2 seconds while we're trying to get every one of our individual steps right. And so it's a nice mode to run it into just for that purpose, just for debugging, making sure you have everything covered and it looks right.
So once you get that 100%, then the idea is you run it in production mode, and at that point you have your phone on you in case an email gets fired off, and it's off and running and monitoring your application.
Great. And how many scripts do I need to create to run monitors on more than one device?
Yeah, so we kind of addressed that in the last question there. So the answer is we want to develop on one device, and let's pick Android's pretty. I like starting with Android. It's pretty friendly to do these types of things. They're readily available, and get everything 100% on Android at as much as you can at that point for all your monitoring steps and test cases. And then when you're done, you want to implement that for several other devices by clicking that implement button, and then doing a trial run on those to finish off that last 5%.
Okay. Okay. Okay, so last question. How about the battery consumption and where we can monitor battery drainage? And where can we monitor battery drainage? Sorry about that.
Yep. So there's once again there is probably some widgets that are worth taking a look at, but my personal go-to again is the APIs. So the nice thing about App Experience is there's APIs already set up to retrieve that type of information. And I usually like to wrap those inside of a Java action, and once again you can query for that information, set up your own routines. There's I think you were right to point everybody in where those APIs are published, because that'll give you an idea of what all you can get at as far as hardware, memory, battery consumption. Those things are very commonly used in scripting, and find it very useful and flexible, leveraging APIs just for those particular features.
Great. Thank you so much, Patrick. Thank you everyone for attending this webinar. I think we're going to wrap this up. There's a few things that I'd like to talk about before we end this webinar. Special thanks again to Patrick for leading this webinar. We have a super quick survey when we wrap everything up that we'd love for you to fill out. It gives us an idea of how we did and gives you the chance to share what topics you'd like to hear next. Also, during this meeting, I snuck in a little handout. So if you look at your console again, please download that performance monitoring sheet. It talks a little bit more about our product and also contains our website information and contact information. And for those of you who weren't able to, and please share that handout with colleagues who weren't able to attend. And for those who have colleagues who couldn't make this webinar, we'll also be running this webinar live on August 3rd during European business hours. We also did record this webinar in case you wanted to watch it again, and we'll be sending you that link when the video becomes available, so please look out for that in your email shortly. And also, as I mentioned earlier, App Experience offers free personal demos of all of our solutions, performance monitoring, test automation, and manual testing, in case you want to get a closer look at our tools and discuss your personal needs with one of our mobile experts. Or even if you just want to try out, testing our mobile app or site with our free trial, just to get like a hands-on experience of our platform. And we also provide professional services for those who are interested, who need kind of scripting or training or consulting services. So for example, if you need help writing scripts for your performance monitoring, we can help with that as well. And finally, please check out, like I said a million times probably, check out our website. Our website was launched just earlier this year. We are still adding a lot of information and resources. If you've heard of Keynote Mobile Testing or Device Anywhere, that's us. We've undergone a new name change, and we are with part of Seagos now. We're still the same solid product and are continuously driving innovation in the mobile space. Connect with us also on social media. We're on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook, and we also have a blog. And that concludes our webinar. Thanks again to everyone who joined. We hope to talk to you soon and see you again in our next webinar.